Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Pink and HQ. We are in the next, hours or so, few hours. We are going to depart to head to Portsmouth for Norwich City's Championship clash tomorrow. Lunchtime kickoff, of course, so don't let that throw you. We just thought we'd do a little bit of a preview show before we hit the road to look ahead to the game. It's been obviously a busy week in terms of the opening day of the season. We've had a cup game, and now the second game of the season, a trip to Fratton Park away. So I think last weekend, it's going to be a testing one. Portsmouth ended the season not just strongly in general, but also with one of the stronger home records in the division, and I'm sure they'll be keen to pick up where they left off. For Norwich and for Liam Manning, it's the opportunity to start a slightly different story in terms of their away form, which, Paddy, feels like a nice place to start, because you think about last season, it was mostly Johannes Torup, one with Jack Wilshere thrown in there as well. Their form on the road wasn't good, and I think we all highlighted it. Obviously, you weren't on the predictions podcast that we did, but you mentioned it and I mentioned it. But we were kind of talking about that need for that away record to be vastly improved if they are to have progress this season.
Yeah, well, I think Sam asked him, didn't he, Liam Manning at Colney yesterday, about, was that something you'd pinpointed coming in? Because he would have obviously done his homework, not only on the personnel and the players he was inheriting, but also how that season ebbed and flowed. And we all can remember away from home, Portsmouth being a prime example, really. That was the game when he went a bit rogue, Johannes, wasn't it? And just came off the back of the QPR defeat, didn't it? Which stopped them in their tracks a little bit. And he just went completely so far removed from what we'd seen in those really August, September type of affairs, particularly the Carrow Road games. And that underlined the point that maybe he felt away from home, what he was trying to do, Hofball, for want of a better phrase, wasn't going to be effective away from home. Certainly when you go to places like QPR, like Portsmouth. And I remember it was Cordoba and Shane Duffy that night, and Ashley Barnes, which tells you how bad it was if he was getting a start. And offered very little as an attacking unit, ground out a 0-0. And now it's just come back to me. I remember then Johannes post-match almost apologising for having adopted that approach. And that's not a team that I want to put on the park, and we'll try not to have to do that again. But it was needs must. Now, I think we saw enough at Watford midweek, which was the first competitive outing for a Liam Manning away Norwich side, that they're going to be a little bit more ambitious than that. And I don't expect them to go to Fratton Park and necessarily try and hold on for dear life to get a point. I think they will try and replicate, as he said, the first 45 was very close to what he envisages a Norwich team to be, whether it's home or away, that control of the ball, that ability to get players up and around Sargent and carry a threat, which they didn't really do enough of against Millwall. So, yeah, Portsmouth, and they've had a good, they've had a mixed week, but a good league start. They won at Charlton, didn't they? But I noticed just there they lost midweek in the League Cup to Reading, I'm assuming.
Sorry, Oxford they were at. We're thinking of Watford, aren't we? They were at Charlton. Sorry. Charlton, that's my fault, because I told you wrong.
No, it was Charlton on the opening day. I think they got a late winner there, which was a very good start to the league season, but they then subsequently lost to Reading midweek in the League Cup. I'm sure that was a weakened team. And so they'll want to bounce back from that. But I'm really enthused by what I saw at Vicarage Road, first half especially, but even the second half when Watford tried to up the intensity and that aggressiveness, Norwich withstood that and came out with the result. So, yeah, I think this is a game to look forward to, because if, and we all hope it is the case, Norwich go there, get a positive result, that just reinforces that, this is now looking like a momentum that's starting to build under Liam Manning and this group of players and that coaching staff. And as he keeps saying, it is a process, but we need to short circuit it. And for me, the best way to do that is by winning games of football, is picking up results, and certainly going to a difficult place like Fratton Park historically and coming away from there with something. So I think it's a real good one to see just where this process is under Liam and this group of players.
Absolutely. I think, Sam, because of the nature of what last week was, and it was disjointed by its nature, we sat in these very chairs and discussed that on the Pinkham podcast last week. We are in the same place. The Wi-Fi is not the greatest, so hopefully you can see and hear us, which, we've got comments coming through, which is always a good sign. But this, in many ways, it will be a very quick, insight into just how quickly they've improved. I heard, obviously, listened to the press conference stuff, and it was interesting to hear Liam Manning speak about the fact they haven't had a lot of training time between Watford and now, and obviously by a result of that, Millwall to now. It's going to be interesting to see just how much they've been able to take on board to improve on from last weekend against, as we've said, a team that will be difficult.
Yeah, definitely. It probably will expose to some extent the difference between sort of vibes and tactics in football, really, because as you've sort of outlined there, tactically there hasn't been much opportunity really to completely change things from a performance that I think everyone agrees now, especially in hindsight, was pretty poor to start off the season. But they do go into it with a much more positive feeling than maybe they've had previously, because they've got that competitive win under their belts. And I think we all said going into Watford how big of a thing that could be, even though it wasn't the biggest game. But actually, I've been surprised, even on top of that, by how big a mood shift there's been since then. I suppose it probably tells us a lot about how fickle we all are as football fans and reporters. But yeah, I think it will be an interesting test, because I'm sure if you told any head coach you can have, maybe Johannes Torp accepted, you can have a full training week to work with players, or you can have a win on the board and go into the next game with that sense of momentum. I think the large majority of those would tell you they'd rather have the win. So I think, Manning will be feeling a little bit more confident after that Watford win, and probably that was a more beneficial posting for this new team than just another training session. But equally, how much materially can you change on the pitch? And the margins are so fine in the Championship. Portsmouth are so well drilled under John Mousinho that if you do get those things just a little bit off, then you're in trouble. So yeah, you're probably right to highlight that. But I would say you look at Watford and how that panned out. I think if I was Manning, I'd rather have that than a few more days or hours training.
Yeah, indeed. We'll come back to the game in a little while, but of course, we've still got a couple of weeks or so to go, halfway through August until the transfer window closes. And Paddy, it does feel like since that what was the last Norwich incoming, Topic, wasn't it, or Makama, but those two, whichever one came second, I think it was Makama.
Is it 11 now, or is it 10?
It's 11. It's definitely 11. It feels like the emphasis has shifted on outgoings. We've seen that a bit this week. Brad Hills was probably noticeable by his absence really on Tuesday night, and obviously, and you reported this, and it's subsequently gone through a permanent move to Stockport. That kind of shows the wheels are turning. We'll come on to another name in a moment that's being linked away. But I guess first and foremost, does it feel like with Brad Hills he was probably right player, wrong time in terms of just how that pecking order got stacked up in the summer? It always felt like it was going to be pretty tough for him.
Well, I mean, you spoke to him when we was out in Holland. It was the first game, wasn't it, after the Volendam game? Yes. And my sense from that was that there was a player who'd gone and had a real good experience on loan at Accrington, and then last season, smaller sample of games, but at a high level, Stockport, all the way to the League One playoffs, fell short a little bit, but had really enjoyed that, I'm sure, that regular playing at a good level week in, week out. And having come back to Norwich, my sense from that interview he did with you was that he wasn't really going to be happy. And that's completely understandable. There is we say a young player, but, you see how quickly players now move through in terms of years into first-team environments. And maybe he felt, another season here, with the greatest respect, probably kicking his heels and maybe going out on loan in the second half of the season. Does that really accelerate his career at this stage? Does that get him that regular game time? No. So, and from Norwich's point of view, they brought in Darling, they brought in Medic. They were going to be, the senior centre-backs this season. Below that, McConville, Cordoba, Duffy's still in the building, but we expect that probably not to be the case. Adebayoga, likewise. It's a very congested area of that squad, and I've just actually watched his first club interview, Brad, with Stockport, and he's good there. He's said it very clearly, and Liam Manning has said it, that more or less Liam Manning has said, I can't give you what you want, which is regular game time in the here and now. And if that's the case, it's probably in all our interests. And for Norwich, me personally, I think that there are good numbers around that deal. If he kicks on and has a good season or two, I mean, it's a 5-year deal he signed. It's a real show of faith from Stockport in him, and that's a club who clearly have aspirations to get to the Championship, if not higher, in time. And who knows, his career may take off, and if so, Norwich feel that they've insulated themselves a little bit in terms of the financial parameters around that deal. So I think financially it makes sense, and it makes sense for Brad Hills as well. So that for me is one of those sweet spot deals. We've seen it down the years, Sarah, Madison, plenty of other examples where, for all parties, it probably is the right time to shake hands and wish him the very best. He's a Norwich lad. He came through the Norwich Academy. Wish him nothing but the best, and he goes on and fulfills his potential. But in the here and now, let's be honest, is he elbowing Medic? Is he elbowing Darling aside Cordoba, even McConville? I think the answer is no. So, I think that looks like a good bit of business any which way you look at it.
Yeah, and the numbers around it, Sam. I guess on the back of kind of what Paddy said there, it's encouraging because there are a lot of players, maybe particularly with their boyhood club, who there would be that emotional aspect to it to try and stay, to give it one more year, to go out on another loan. There is something refreshing about the fact that he wants to get out and play. I remember speaking to him actually whilst he was on loan at Accrington. It was towards the back end of that season, and as Paddy said, he'd done very well. And he was almost saying then he was desperate to go and play again. He didn't want to go back and play under 21s football, and had that spell in the first half of last season where he was in and around it without really pushing into it. Probably felt like that signing of Rory McConville maybe was the point at which it felt difficult for him, would you say?
Yeah, well, I suppose you can't really carry that many centre-backs to sort of play that backup role. I think you look at the rest of the dynamics. Clearly, Medic, Cordoba, Darling are all in very much firmly in that starting mix. And I'm sure if you asked Manning for his top three centre-backs in a quiet moment, he'd tell you it was those three. And then you can't really have two players sort of playing backup roles. I think personally I look at McConville and worry even about him in terms of his development and the amount of game time that he's going to get. And even though obviously we've seen various injury crises at times at Norwich, Ben Krasene's also played in that role both in pre-season and obviously at Watford on Tuesday night. And I think they've got a few other options who maybe could drop back there and fill in those positions. And you just think at this stage of his career, he's 21. He does really need that progression. And like you said, when McConville came in, he becomes, fifth choice. I think it felt at that point like there was a very clear established order. And even though that was under Johannes Hoff-Torup, I think we all got the sense then that Hills wasn't just someone they were keeping in the background, for when he inevitably flourished and became the player they wanted at championship level. It felt there like they were saying they need a younger centre-back to come in and compete a little bit and then be the option for the future. And that probably does tell you that it wasn't Brad Hills. So there was sort of a little period this summer where it felt like maybe things would, he got another chance because Manning came in. But ultimately, you looked at the number of options. They had that choice at the start of the summer to maybe only sign one centre-back and to trust in those players that were already there. But I think as soon as they signed Jakov Medic as well, that felt like a big moment to me because that was saying, I thought, this current group of centre-backs isn't good enough to sort of go as is. And you felt that probably a few of them would have to leave. So I think those are probably the two signings that stand out to me as the sort of killer blows to Brad Hills. But ultimately, it's also a situation where you look at the number of academy players Norwich have who look promising at various points in their career and don't even end up being professional footballers. To get a 5-year contract at a League One club who are in the playoffs last season and for Norwich to fetch a 7-figure fee for him is actually fantastic business compared to the sort of academy average. And I think Hills should be proud of that, even though I'm sure Norwich fans are looking at it feeling maybe slightly disappointed that he never really got that first team chance. But overall, it's a win. And I think, although I think I tweeted this at the time, it feels not, it's a little bit underwhelming, but I think it's definitely a satisfactory end to things for all parties.
Yeah, a little bit unsexy as well, but because of his academy graduate status, I guess that's essentially pure profit for Norwich, isn't it? Which in the current world with your PSRs and headrooms, as Mark Atanasio said on our podcast, it's that can be quite valuable. I guess the other aspect, Paddy, is this from Ben. There's clearly been some Shane Duffy loan rumours today. He said, can't imagine I'll use the word in a difficult situation, which Sheffield Wednesday are, stumping up the money to take on his wages. I think you could probably throw some other championship clubs in there as well. And I guess this probably adds to the sense of where we started this conversation, that the wheels are turning a little bit on those players that are on the fringes.
Yeah, and certainly Hills won't be the last exit this window. What's left of it? What we know, just over 2 weeks away. I think Monday is Monday, isn't it? Is it Monday, September 1st? Irrespective of what day it is, but it's September the 1st, 7 p.m.
Yes,
it is a Monday. Yeah, so just over a fortnight as we sit here. And yeah, Shane Duffy, I know he was on the bench midweek. I know Liam said to Sam yesterday that he spoke well in the dressing room as well. So he's not a million miles away from the 11, but in all reality, as Sam rightly pointed out, the recruitment they've done this summer, you don't, for me, do that. If Shane Duffy is nailed on, he's our key centre back. I think they've made their decision on that. I don't think he features, or he's certainly part of Liam Manning's longer term vision. 12 months left on his contract. You're getting into Grant Hanley, you're getting into Ashley Barnes territory for me. Further back, Jordan Hugill. These are experienced players who, from their point of view, need to be playing at this stage of their careers, need to get another deal somewhere else. So it's just a case of where for me. It's just the exit strategy now and how that's managed. Before the end of last season, there was a lot of chatter around the MLS, and could there be an option now? I think that window closes next week, so that would have to happen pretty quickly. And I've heard nothing in intervening period to suggest that is now a viable option. Sheffield Wednesday is the club this morning. You've heard one or two other Championship clubs, so it feels to me there's probably a Championship level club there to do a deal. Now, whether it's a loan or whether they just come to a mutual, as they did with Barnes, as they did with Hanley previously. But I think what's not in doubt is that, and it's clearly evident in terms of the lack of game time he's had at the start of this season and did through pre-season, if we're being honest, that Shane Duffy is not part of Liam Manning's plans. So purely if you're Shane Duffy and looking at the equation, the writing's on the wall here. So go and get yourself another deal, get your agents busy, and in what remains of this window, try and get yourself the best deal possible. And as I say, I think he will go. And I wouldn't actually, while we're staying on the theme of centre-backs, Adebayoga left, I could see that happening as well, because probably a little bit like Brad Hills, he's gone and had a very, very good season with Dundee United on loan, got them all the way to European level football, played a lot of games in that period, will really have felt he's advanced his career far beyond development level football now, which I think would be all that's down for him here at Carrow Road this season. So whether it's a loan, whether it's a permanent, he's another one I think you could lose. And in terms of numbers, that would then leave you effectively four centre-backs for a system that, and that's not even adding a Bren Krzeni or, those hybrid type players who could play in a 3, could play in a 2. So yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we get the other side of September the 1st and no Duffy, no Adebayoga.
Yeah, and I guess the element with Duffy as well is around the loan move. If he did go on loan, he's in the final year of his contract, so that would be as good as his Norwich spell over, unless obviously they sat down and sorted something else out, which would feel unlikely. Josh Sargent is still a Norwich player, which feels like every week that passes is more notable, and obviously expecting him to play and be at Fratton Park tomorrow, unless anything happens in the next period, which is you can never totally rule out. But this from Jack. At what point can we dare to dream Sargent is staying? Leeds and Brentford both signed strikers this week. I must have missed Leeds. I'm going to be honest. I've been off. Have they signed Calvert-Lewin? Okay, interesting. Is that done, or is that in the process of being done?
I don't know if it's confirmed, but I think it's deal agreed.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, that would be two pretty big suitors you would imagine ruled out from a Premier League perspective. Are you daring to dream yet about Josh Sargent?
I think you can dare to dream. I don't know if you can be completely sure at this stage, but it does feel more and more as time goes on, like there might not be the club. I think there are a few of those clubs that probably everyone has been looking out for, and that I've seen various Norwich fans celebrating when they've signed players instead of Josh Sargent. But I would always just say, every year I think we forget just the sheer levels of panic that set in the last 3 or 4 days of the window at times. Ultimately, for clubs at the level where I think Josh Sargent could play, the amount that it's going to cost to sign him, it's chunks of change really compared to what they're spending on a lot of other players. So I could still see a scenario where maybe one of the clubs who have signed another striker, someone gets injured in the next couple of weeks, they don't score any goals in their first 3 Premier League games, and they go, just for insurance purposes, could they go and spend 18 million on Josh Sargent after the numbers that he's produced for Norwich? And I definitely wouldn't rule that out. But at this stage, it doesn't sound like there's anything particularly advanced. Obviously, he's been very much a part of what Norwich have done so far this season, and probably underscored for everyone, just in case they'd forgotten, how huge he can be to that team, and probably how irreplaceable he is as well. So yeah, I think you can probably dare to dream, but I'm not quite in the camp of deciding he's staying and mapping out how things play out with Josh Sargent up front for Norwich this season. I think it's probably too early to say, just because when you look at the way that Norwich do things, they sign 11 players before the Championship season even starts. It's easy to assume that all clubs have that level of strategy and planning, and they know what they're going to be doing in advance. I think you see quite often that clubs do get itchy feet, they do get worried, they do get reactive, and for the financial reasons that are spelled out in terms of the value that Sargent provides and what he'd cost compared to a lot of Premier League and players and other players who are playing in sort of the top 5 European leagues and at the sort of level that Sargent I think can play. Yeah, I just wouldn't. I wouldn't want to rule it out at this stage. But I'm definitely more confident in the possibility of him staying at Norwich than I was a few weeks ago when Wolfsburg were sniffing around. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But I wouldn't be buying a shirt with Sargent on the back just yet.
No, as Sam says there, you know how quickly these things can change. And I guess, Paddy, I think. Certainly, if you'd have said to me this time last month, would he still be a Norwich player on August the 15th? I think I'd have probably said no. So the fact he is a bonus. And I guess probably the next question in many ways links to what does happen with him in the coming weeks. So feel free to combine the two. But do you feel, as it stands, Norwich are kind of done from an incoming perspective with the 11 that they've got in the building?
Well, I mean, it was interesting. Sam asked him, might tell her like it was Andy Ward, wasn't it? Asked him later on in the presser about, do you go into the market now with Forson's injury? And I thought he shut that one down completely. He talked about Kvistgaard and Cernach, referenced how well Macondes and Schwartau had done in those areas. Jallo could probably go in there. So, that would suggest to me that they probably pretty much are. I mean, there was still this talk that a Premier League loan in a wide area would be something they'd look at. That's something you could see happening between now and the end of the window, just because of the nature of Premier League season starts this coming weekend. That finality in terms of top 6, top 8 clubs making decisions on their younger players will come, and you could easily put a loan deal together as pretty much up until the deadline itself on that first day of September. So could see that, but beyond that, no. I think Inwood now would hinge on hypothetically Sargent, hypothetically Nunes. That type of reacting because something has happened to the existing personnel. I think if those players stayed in the building, I don't see too much else happening inward, and it'll be more the focus on trimming, which is how Liam has mapped it out for the last 2 or 3 weeks. My fear, just to echo where Sam was going with Sargent, is I think the feeling still internally is that may resolve itself in Josh Sargent leaving. But obviously, there's no club anywhere near Wolfsburg. That deal would have got done club to club financially. It was only Josh Sargent put the brakes on that. So that tells you that Norwich were of a mind to cash in around that figure, 20 initially, maybe rising to 22, 23 mil. Any club comes anywhere near those figures, particularly if it's a Premier League club, I think the deal gets done. So, let's see. As always with these transfer windows, they could go on for 3 years and it'd be the final week/hours of the final window when all hell breaks loose. So I fully expect us to be in that scenario again. Even if we got as close as 2-3 days out from the window, I still wouldn't be breathing easy if I was a Norwich fan. But what an absolute bonus that would be if he stays in the building, even if it was. And I also think this scenario is in play. If it doesn't get done in this window, you could see if he continues the way he's going goals-wise, he's almost goal a game output, that come January, that might be the window we actually see him depart, because then his star will be firmly in the ascendant, and as a result, there probably might be more suitors willing to pay the levels of finance that would make that deal possible. So all things are in play as we sit here. There certainly isn't any club anywhere near Wolfsburg. Burnley have had a near ball, not at the numbers Norwich deem are worthy of continuing those dialogues. So it's for Burnley maybe to come back if that is the case. But you look around the Premier League, could a Brentford, could a Fulham, these sort of clubs that haven't really been linked. Palace, yeah. So there's a lot of potential Premier League clubs who could come out of the woodwork in these remaining 2 weeks. So, still too much water to flow under that bridge. But my fear is that it probably does still end with Josh Sargent departing, sadly.
Yes, as someone who knows about these things told me a couple of weeks ago that deadline day would be very quiet. So I'm hoping that is the way it's going to be. Clearly, irrespective of what happens, it's a 7 p.m. deadline now, which is much appreciated for us guys. I won't retell the story of was it 2023 window where we were up till very late, me and Sam, but we'll park that. So that's fine. And that probably lends us, Sam, to sort of reflect on Watford, because Paddy mentioned in Marcelino Nunez was clearly on target. It was an odd goal, I think is probably the best way to put it. But in terms of his overall performance, has he put himself, do you feel, in the conversation for tomorrow and starting that game in one of the two, if it is going to be that sort of hybrid three at the back shape in one of those two midfield slots?
I definitely think so. I think he was one of, if not the best, well, probably not the best. Diallo, I think, takes that accolade, but I thought Nunez was definitely up there with Norwich's best operators, and I thought you could really tell the difference between what he offered and what Norwich had in that midfield against Millwall, because he does have that creativity. He does take up those intelligent spaces where you can progress the ball and find him. There were so many times when Norwich were trying to play the ball out from the back. You had Topic or Krezene in a deep position, and Nunez managed to find space in the middle of the pitch. He was the one carrying it over the halfway line, looking up, picking the passes that really started the attacks. And I think against Millwall, given how much they struggled, first of all, to break through the lines at times, and then to actually create good situations once they got in and around the box, I think probably they did miss somebody like Nunez. I think for all of Jacob Wright's qualities, I think physically he's better than Nunez. I think he takes up better defensive positions than Nunez does. And to be fair, his passing is good in terms of switching the play, moving the ball quickly, deciding the tempo of the game a little bit. But I don't think he has quite that flair or that ability to see passes and to advance attacks that Nunez has. I think Topic, although they are different types of players, Topic is more of that typical physical screener of the defence and defensive midfielder. I think neither him nor Wright really offers that sort of creativity. So you're asking a lot of the wing backs in that scenario to create the chances. You're having to find probably quite direct balls into tight spaces for those wide number 10s, and for Josh Sargent as well to try to create some individual quality. And I think they did rely on that a little bit too much against Millwall, whereas for me, Nunez is that go-between between the defence and the attack, and he really links things quite well. But I'd say, based on the way that Manning likes to do things, you look at his Bristol City midfield, and that was quite mechanical at times. It was quite physical and box-to-box. And although Nunez covers that ground, he's not really that type to sort of win the midfield battle just with individual physicality and quality. In that sense, he's more one to have in your team when you already know that you've got that superiority. And I actually thought probably what played into his hands to an extent on Tuesday night was just how poor Watford were and how much they struggled to cover the ground and fill the spaces in midfield. So I wonder, going to Fratton Park, which is obviously a really difficult away game, a tough place to go, and knowing Manning's leanings and the fact that I think he's probably more likely to be flexible on the road than Johannes Hoftorp was last season, I do wonder if he'll risk having a midfield two with one of those players being somebody who maybe doesn't fit that more physical profile, because you have to remember the rest of the system is actually quite attacking, even though they're sort of number 10s in those positions. With Forster now, it looks like it could possibly be, sort of three strikers if you go with a Quistgaard and Sargent and Sienat's front three, which I could see happening. Then if you have Giallo on the left wing and say Jack Stacey on at right wing back, that's a very attacking team. And if you want that balance to come from the middle of the pitch, I'm not sure Nunez really addresses it too much. I think he actually adds to the number of sort of attacking, creative, technical players that you have in there. And I just wonder, for this sort of game against a team that is very direct, very physical, in terms of their numbers last season, they were really up there for their high pressing, for their number of long balls. And I'm not sure watching those balls go over his head is really going to benefit Nunez particularly well. So although I think that individual performance against Watford really would warrant a start, and if he did end up in that starting 11, you could say it was absolutely justified, I think for tactical reasons and Manning's system, knowing how he leans, I just think right now, if I had to commit to it, I'd say he'll probably go back to Jacob Wright over Nunez. Also worth remembering, I think Nunez played 90 minutes or a good chunk of it at least, whereas obviously there was that effort to keep Topic and Wright both fit, which maybe gives you another insight into Manning's thinking.
Absolutely, and I think, Paddy, to kind of pick up on where we left off there and to speak about what happened on Tuesday, that it felt, and again, I obviously you boys were there, I wasn't, but I watched it at home, and it felt very much akin to what we saw against Snack Breda, actually, in terms of that more hybrid system, Diallo involved, and it gave them a bit more of an attacking edge, but probably that word that Sam said, a better balance and that ability to switch between a 4 and a 5. I think it's probably as good as Ben Cruzene has looked at Norwich, to be honest, in that system in both of those two games. It would be, I guess, unsurprising if he went back to that sort of system and that setup tomorrow. Obviously, Diallo in from the start.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be quite a selection call to take him out of the mix, given how impressive he was in that system. I would caveat it that Watford were pretty poor and afforded them far too much. We just had a debate about the centre mid. I mean, Topic and Nunez, the amount of times they could turn in midfield and look up and pick any pass they wanted because there was nobody pressing them. I don't think that would be the case at Portsmouth. But even in that environment, if you contrast it with Millwall, where it was Stacey and it was Schlupp and it very stodgy and they got pinned back and it became a 5. And after that sort of first 20, 25 minutes, there was none of that sense in the first half at Vicarage Road. And it's probably not all on the shoulders of Jallow. I thought Kellen Fisher was good. And I might actually lean towards him instead of Stacey tomorrow. I just think he offered a bit more dynamism in that wing-back role at Vicarage Road. As Liam said, he liked his bite. He certainly didn't shy away from the physical aspect of that. You'll need to have that in spades at Portsmouth tomorrow. But it would be very surprising that. And I think a lot of the discourse coming out of Millwall it was those two wing back selections that makes that system sing, or conversely makes it feel quite restrictive, quite suffocating. And we saw on midweek that with Fisher and with Jallow, it transformed it almost. You still had a very similar structure, I thought, defensively. You still had Sargent at the point of the attack, but crucially, when you had two very progressive wing-backs, it allowed Marcondes and Schwartau to really be closely in attendance. They didn't have to almost come looking for the ball because you had that threat in wide areas. There's a lot of fluidity in terms of how they move the ball through the middle of the park. So, yeah, I personally would like to see very, very similar lineup to an approach to what we saw first half against Watford. Maybe, as Sam's rightly pointed out, maybe you go right instead of Nunez, and then probably Chris Garden if he's no issues with the illness side of it, and Cernach come in, and Schwartau and Marcondes drop out. But other than that, maybe a debate for Cordoba to come back in, and if there is going to be a real physical challenge put up to that back line tomorrow. But yeah, the bulk of that 11 who started at Vicarage Road, I would like to see retain their places for the kickoff tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. And to sort of go to obviously a player who won't be involved, Sam, Amankwah Forson. I think certainly we saw it in Holland. Had a really good impact probably in both of the games that he played, and throughout pre-season was quite a bright spark. There was some good stuff in that Breda friendly as well. And you think about his Norwich career, and again we used the word luck. He hasn't had an awful amount of it. We saw him last week going off and looked very distraught, shirt over the face. It's never a good sign. And clearly, subsequently, as revealed, he's going to be out for a sort of significant period. Months was the word that Liam Manning used, which is not great. It's not great for him. The timing isn't great. Of course, it creates opportunities for other people, which Paddy kind of alluded to there, and maybe gives Matthias Kriskoren a natural opportunity to step in as a starter. But for him and for where he was at and the opportunity that he had to really grasp this season, obviously didn't play a huge amount last season. It's frustration for him, I would imagine, pretty tough for him as well, I suspect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you finally think you've probably got your break after what was quite a difficult season, and everyone, I think, could see what he was contributing. Even the back end of last season in that Cardiff game, I think he was the best player on the pitch that day. Pre-season, really good. And then first game of the season, maybe not his best performance, but he was involved. He was playing a really key role, and probably in a position that most people would say was more well suited to him than a lot of what he's done. Obviously, he's played a little bit out on the right wing for Norwich, sometimes slightly deeper in midfield than I felt has benefited him. But in a sort of number 10 position, I think he really thrived and probably played a role that we've been saying for a while Norwich needed, because, you know, obviously Manning, as Paddy mentioned yesterday, mapped out some of the other options that they've got in that area. And certainly in terms of position, they have got a few who can go and play in that role, but they haven't really got too many of those creative number 10s, as we keep saying or have said a few times. Probably they needed last season, especially with the sort of style of play that they wanted to play. So I think he does give them something unique in that sense. I think he's really, really good at taking the ball in tight spaces and turning, and it's kind of a little bit like I was saying about Nunez. Obviously, they're kind of cogs at different stages of the wheel, but I think they really help, you know, provide a go between the midfield for Forson. It's the midfield and the attack. For Nunez, it might be the defence and the midfield. But they're the sorts of players you need to have that little bit of creativity and that technical quality when you're kind of dominating a game. And we know obviously that Manning won't be as wedded to possession and slow build up as Torrop was last season. But there will be a fair few games, especially if Norwich are as good as they hope to be and compete at the top end of the table as they hope to. There will be a lot of games where they'll be against inferior opposition. They'll have to break down deep defences. And I think Fulson was the sort of player who had that quality and that ability to do it. And I think they're left with a lot of very good players, but maybe slightly mechanical ones who are better receiving the ball in the box, taking a couple of touches and finishing, rather than providing those chances or creating those chances. So both for that reason, the fact that I think he brings something fairly unique, and because he'd obviously managed to impress Manning. You just look at the performances and you could tell that, but also he was referencing him unprompted quite a lot in pre-season. And yeah, I think for him, he'll be absolutely gutted. And now it probably is quite a tough psychological test because by the time he comes back, it might have been, I don't know, 18 months he's been a Norwich player, probably a little bit less than that, but it will be a significant time and he won't have that many appearances to look back on. So he has to use this time now well, but also to keep the faith, which I recognise will be quite a difficult thing for him to do, and I think would be quite difficult for anyone to do. I've no doubt that if he does do that, then based on what he's shown in the last few weeks, he will have the qualities and the ability and the backing to contribute to this Norwich side. But when you've had as much bad luck as he has so far, to then go through another few months and stay positive throughout it, I think will be difficult. So yeah, obviously we'll wish him the best with that, and I think it will be tough, but it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to do that and how he comes out at the other side of it.
If there is a silver lining, which I'm not really sure there is, you're kind of not glad, but clear. I think the timing probably could have been worse. If you look at when he got injured, it was around November time, wasn't it, last year? And he missed a lot of football between November and January just by the nature of what the schedule is like. Now, it's a couple of international breaks. There's maybe not as many games as perhaps it would have been later on in the season, but hopefully, yeah, you can come back and make an impact. This question, Paddy, is an interesting one about Jakov Medic, who struggled against Millwall. We spoke about that on the podcast. What do you make of his position in the team? I mean, Adam here kind of suggesting he could have done better for the goal that Barr scored on Tuesday night at Watford. What do you make of him? Is it one of those where Norwich just needs to keep giving him games to kind of get used to the intensity of the Championship, but English football, I guess, as well?
Well, I mean, yeah, in real time, I thought he, again, worryingly, just a real pacey, mobile attacker who twisted away from him far too easily. And I mean, Grimshaw said it to Sam, didn't he? He thought he clearly could have done better on the shot, but you don't get the shot away if the defender deals with it at source. And off the back of the Millwall goal, where, I mean, you watch that back, and that Millwall player was 2 or 3 yards behind Medic when the ball was thread through, and yet at the point he's slotting it in the goal, you know, Medic is barely in the shot. So that is a concern. There's no doubt about it. He does look, as that question rightly points out, to highlight, you know, his pace or lack of is a concern, because that will be targeted by opposition defence or attacking units in the Championship. And if it continues to get exposed, then clearly Liam Manning will have to rethink and I'll have to do something maybe positionally, to get him in a less exposed position.
You'd have to go if you're going to go with free, you'd have to go in the middle, wouldn't they? I think that's what you'd have to do.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah, because you cannot have a weak aspect of your defence that is on a routine basis being exposed. So yeah, it's not ideal. I thought he was very poor for his debut, but you have to probably give him the mitigation that it was, the Millwall game was his first real hit out and the first experience of the Championship, and particularly a very aggressive team in Millwall. That contretemps he had with, was it Cooper? Was it in the first half when he got flung to the floor and I think the lad got a booking? I mean, I doubt he'd have got too much of that playing in the Bundesliga, if I'm honest, or even with the brief amount of games he got with Ajax in their Eredivisie. So it's all a learning curve. Far too early to make any hard or fast judgments on him. But that is an area of his game that, either it's, him adapting and reading the game better and anticipating those situations and getting yourselves in positions that can offset maybe that lack of sheer pace that it doesn't seem he possesses. But or it's for Liam Manning and his coaches to come up with something, as we just discussed there, that kind of masks that aspect a little bit. Because there's no doubt, he was recruited, brought to the club as a mainstay of a defensive unit in the Championship. They looked at what he did in the Bundesliga, but more so the season before he had with Bochum in Bundesliga 2, felt it mapped very well with the Championship and the challenge and what they were looking for from a defensive profile. But the first two games have raised the question, and it's a justifiable question. So let's see how it moves forward with him. But you just hope that, given his seemingly his pedigree, that he can adapt and he can map his own game to what's required in the Championship, and that we're just in a bit of a process and a bit of an uncomfortable one at that in these opening games, because there's no doubt that can't continue. It can't be that he gets routinely exposed for pace in wide areas, because if so, then there has to be a rethink.
Yeah, although to be fair, I think against Millwall he didn't get a lot of defensive support probably throughout that game, to be honest. And I think on the flip side, where maybe there's been question marks around him, I think Harry Darling has looked, particularly on Tuesday night, I thought he was excellent, and I think he had a pretty solid debut last weekend as well. So that looks a positive. Just this one on chat, we're going to be live for probably the next 5 minutes or so about Dan Casey. Would be a development signing, so that's one they like. There's lots of other clubs that do as well, so we'll see if they can get that one over the line before the summer window. But will be a predominantly on the 21 side. I think he's left Arsenal now, so would be I'm not sure kind of on the compensation stuff. We need to look into that, but that's one that they're trying for. Sam, I guess kind of finish where we started. This feels like a really interesting test from a Norwich perspective. I think basically if you took the Championship table from January the 1st, I think Millwall were in 5th and Portsmouth were in 7th. So even though maybe people have looked at this start as being quite favourable in terms of the opportunities that Norwich have, they're playing teams with a lot of momentum. I must confess that as we sit here now, I don't know a huge amount of what they've done over the summer, but it feels like they've been there's a lot of continuity there as well. John Mousinho is a very good coach. I think he'd have probably been a half-decent outside shout for Norwich in the summer, and I'm sure he will get linked as well if Portsmouth continue to do well this season. So it's going to be interesting. I think Josh Murphy's a doubt. We saw how good he was at Carrow Road, and actually saw how good that Portsmouth team was at Carrow Road on what was it, Easter? It was Good Friday, wasn't it, where they absolutely tore Norwich apart, and it was probably the beginning of the end for Johannes. They've shown how difficult they can be at this level, particularly I think at Fratton Park.
Yeah, definitely, and in a lot of ways I think it's the sort of game that probably underlines exactly what the Championship is about, because I'm sure this group of new players would look at it and go, they've got a win on the board, they want to improve on a poor league start. I'm sure they would absolutely love a nice home game where they can sort of settle into it and dominate possession as they did against Watford. But the thing is with the Championship, it throws up so many of these different tests and these difficult ones. There's not really ever that comfortable proving ground to work out exactly what it is you're coming up against. So I think Norwich will have to adapt sort of within the game to a certain extent. Obviously Manning and his sort of analysis team will prepare the players as much as he can for what Portsmouth are going to provide. As you said, there's a lot of things going for them that they proved last season, and I think a really, really good coach that basically everyone you speak to rates really highly. But I think there is going to be some learning on the job, and hopefully this is where them going sort of slightly more experienced than last summer will go in their favour, because they've got a few players who have been in the Championship before, and even if they haven't, they've played at high levels. They've been, I'm sure, in intimidating atmospheres, and they've dealt with this sort of thing. But ultimately, the Championship can be so unique that you're never really going to get that nice, comfortable game that you'd like, just to settle in, just to absorb the benefits of a first win of the season, and try to get yourself on the board in the league. They'll have to do all of the things that they want to do, and I don't want to stray into cliches, but there is that sort of earn the right to play type feeling about this game. It feels like they need to do those things first, and then think about tactics and how they replicate what they did against Watford in a lot of ways. So I think they're probably much more well equipped for this sort of test under Liam Manning, and with the squad that they've now got, than maybe they were last season. But you saw from the way that Millwall took them apart a couple of times last week that they haven't completely ironed out all of those issues. So they'll have to be alert. They'll have to be ready to deal with a really physical and direct team, and a different sort of test. But yeah, as I said, I think they're probably in a better position to deal with these sorts of games, particularly away from home, than maybe they would have been last season.
Finally then, Paddy, I'm not going to ask you for a score prediction because we'll save that for our team news video tomorrow, which will be 11:15.
Somebody's saying I need to get an ice cream. I need to liven up.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't think the lighting has helped. Is what I would say.
Quite healthy. I've had a good summer tan wise compared to you. You're your usual ghost like figure.
I am. That's very true.
But I just wanted to say I did have a white Magnum yesterday.
Did you? They're good, aren't they?
Very nice. Very nice.
I like you can get the white chocolate and strawberry. We're going down this Andrew. We'll talk about this off camera. But I mean, obviously we'll save your score prediction for team news, which because of new EFL regulations, just to hammer home the point, has moved it 15 minutes earlier now. So it's now 75 minutes before kickoff. So we will be live about 11:15 at Fratton Park, all being well, tomorrow across our channels. So just putting you guys on notice that it's slightly earlier, so a bit of a readjustment with the lunchtime kickoff, the first of the season. So yeah, no score prediction, but in terms of a game, what do you think Norwich should expect? Are going to have to improve on from maybe last week and even Tuesday night if they want to walk away from Fratton Park with, if not a result, then a win?
Well, I mean, just in a similar vein to the challenge that Millwall put down, certainly in the second half, Saturday last, very aggressive, very in your face, pressing high, trying to make life as uncomfortable as possible for Norwich in their build-up phases. I think you'll get all that and more tomorrow. Portsmouth's first Championship home game. I know they had the midweek game against Reading, the League Cup, but I would imagine the crowd and also the lineup reflected that was a bit of a free hit. But this is the real business. They've had a very good win at Charlton on the opening day of last week. They'll want to follow up on that. So that intensity, that energy, that'll be in the crowd. That'll be in those group of home players, with Mousinho obviously firing them up. So Norwich will need to match that for me. They will need to be as aggressive, as intense, as willing to engage in those aspects. And if they were to obtain a level of parity in those aspects of the game, then I think we saw enough Watford midweek that on the ball they do carry a threat and they can get players in and around Sargent. They can threaten with the likes of Jallow, with the likes of Fisher or Stacey in those wider areas. So yeah, I think if Norwich can deal with the physical elements of the challenge, then for me they've got enough quality in this group of players to go there and get a result. And if they don't, and if they are similarly kind of second best in those areas, like Liam said after the game, they didn't do the basics right for him. They got dragged into Millwall's type of game. If all of those barbs are applicable after this game, I don't think they get anything from it. So they need to basically try and subdue what Portsmouth are going to try and do, and then just let their quality come through. And if they do that, then there's definitely a result from here on the South Coast for me. You?
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that in a mix. I'll ask you very simply, yes or no. We'll steer away from score predictions, but do Norwich come away with something from Fratton Park?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Oh, I've got to go all three then, haven't I? And say yes as well. That's a nice place to leave it. Thank you all very much for joining us on this Friday afternoon, your preview show here across Pinkin Channels. As I said, we'll be live next with team news tomorrow morning ahead of Norwich City's first away game of the season at Fratton Park. We'll have all angles covered from there, pinkin.com. /subscribe, the place to go as well for our offer and whatnot to join us And let's hope that our predictions for a rare change are right, and Norwich do leave Fratton Park with something. Thank you very much for watching. Safe trip to everybody going down to the South Coast tomorrow or later today, and we'll see you down there. I think it's going to be a full Norwich City away end as well, so should be some atmosphere. See you soon. Thanks for watching.